What if I told you the Yu-Gi-Oh! You grew up with isn't the real story? The Duelist Kingdom arc may seem like a high-stakes game of cards, but in its original form, it's filled with darkness, violence, and shocking twists that never made it to your TV screens. We all loved Duelist Kingdom for its legendary duels and iconic showdowns, but did you know this fun arc was originally one of sacrifice, violence, and even death in the manga? Why was it toned down so drastically, and just how far did censorship go to hide the true nature of Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, let's dive in and find out how dark this legendary arc really was. The reason for these huge differences goes all the way back to the source material. The original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga by Kazuki Takahashi was never meant to be a light-hearted card game story. It was dark, intense, and focused on heavy themes like revenge, psychological torment, and the real dangers of the shadow games. In the manga, losing wasn't just about dropping life points. It could mean losing your sanity, your dignity, or even your life. The early Japanese anime from Studio Gallop stuck close to this mature tone, making it clear that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was aimed at teens and older fans. But when 4Kids Entertainment took over for the Western release, everything changed. Their goal was to make Yu-Gi-Oh! Safe and marketable for a much younger audience. That meant cutting out violence, erasing mature themes, and reworking storylines to fit strict broadcast standards. The anime shifted from a narrative about dangerous games and dark consequences to a show that promoted the card game and kept things as kid-friendly as possible. Scenes were sanitized, dialogue was rewritten, and even character designs were altered to remove anything that could be considered inappropriate. This transformation didn't just lighten the mood, it changed the entire feeling of the story. And some of the most unsettling details from the manga were replaced or toned down, especially when it came to the fates of key characters. One of the best examples of how much darker the original story could get is what happened to Yugi's grandfather at the start of Duelist Kingdom. In the manga, Pegasus doesn't just trap Grandpa's soul in a card, he uses the Millennium Eye to seal it inside a regular VHS tape. This detail isn't just odd, it's unsettling. Yugi is forced to carry around this tape, knowing his grandfather's soul is literally inside it. Even more, Yugi can actually put this tape into a video camera and see and talk to his grandfather throughout the tournament. This constant reminder of what's at stake gives the whole arc a tense, desperate feeling. The anime adaptation, of course, changed this, making Grandpa's imprisonment less disturbing by tying it to a Duel Monsters card and leaving out the VHS tape entirely. This softened the tone and kept everything centered around the card game. But in the manga, that VHS tape symbolized how far Pegasus would go to manipulate and torment his victims. This wasn't the only time the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga pushed boundaries with its consequences. And here's a moment that might shock you. Did you know that Yugi put Kaiba in a coma in the original manga? Their duel in episode 1 of the anime is based on various chapters from the manga. It combines Yugi's first 2 encounters with Kaiba but excludes many events, including the Death Tea theme park. Now, after their infamous duel, Yugi activated what's called a penalty game. Instead of simply walking away after winning, the Pharaoh, the darker presence within the Millennium Puzzle, punished Kaiba so severely that it left him unconscious for 6 entire months. That's right, 6 months of Kaiba being completely comatose, which actually sparks a lot of the events of Duelist Kingdom moving forward. This act wasn't about teaching Kaiba a lesson gently, it was about making an example of him. This moment captured a different side of the Pharaoh. Far from the guiding protector we see later, this version of him was cold, calculating, and unforgiving. In his eyes, Kaiba's actions didn't just warrant defeat, but outright repentance on a psychological level. The manga framed this as divine justice, a harsh but supposedly fair punishment for Kaiba's arrogance and cruelty. However, it also highlighted just how terrifyingly absolute the Pharaoh could be in his decisions. Now, in the anime, this was replaced by a duel-ending lesson in humility, and the coma twist was completely removed to soften the fallout. It made Yugi's victory feel cleaner, but also far less impactful. Mai Valentine, or Mai Kujaku in the original, stands out as a character whose appearance was dramatically altered between the manga and the anime. In the manga, her outfit during Duelist Kingdom was intentionally provocative. A corset-styled top held together by strings that exposed the middle of her chest, paired with a short skirt. This design wasn't just for show, it matched Mai's confident personality and the way she used her looks as a tactic in duels, often distracting her opponents and asserting control over the situation. A clear example of this comes up in her duel with Rex Raptor on the boat to Duelist Kingdom. In the anime, Mai offers Rex a kiss if he wins, but in the manga, she ups the stakes, telling Rex she'll do anything he wants all night long. This bold approach was toned down significantly in the anime adaptation, as well as her outfit that was redesigned for more coverage. Her cleavage was reduced or erased, and her skirt was lengthened. Now, these changes were made to make the show more acceptable for younger audiences in the West, following 4Kids' standards for broadcast. This wasn't an isolated case. The same approach was taken with other female characters and even extended to the artwork on Duel Monsters cards themselves. When it comes to the actual Duel Monsters cards, censorship took center stage with some of the most recognizable monsters. Harpie Lady is a prime example. In the original Japanese version, her artwork featured a revealing outfit and sharp, intimidating details that gave her a striking presence. For the Western release, 4Kids made significant changes. They added a full bodysuit to cover her exposed skin and removed the prominent nipple spikes from her costume, when equipped with a card cyber shield. These edits were all about reducing her sexualization and making the card more suitable for a younger audience. The result was a much tamer look that changed the overall tone of the card. What was once an edgy, mature design became something more playful and less threatening. These types of visual changes weren't just about appearances, they shaped how fans experienced the world of Duel Monsters, making it feel less intense than what Japanese audiences originally saw. But not every unsettling element in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was erased with a digital paintbrush. Some of the creepiest moments were left to the story itself, especially in duels that pushed the boundaries of what you'd expect from a kid's show. Another moment that stands out in the manga is the duel between Yami Yugi and the Ventriloquist of the Dead, also known as the Puppeteer of Doom. This character isn't just a Kaiba impersonator. He uses a Kaiba puppet and the real Kaiba's stolen deck to taunt and intimidate Yugi. The Ventriloquist's doll speaks with a stuttering, unsettling tone, claiming to be Kaiba's soul seeking revenge. The duel quickly became a game of psychological horror, with Yugi visibly shaken by the bizarre performance and the idea that some part of Kaiba's grudge might be haunting him. Seeing the Blue Eyes White Dragon played by the puppet only adds to the tension. The Ventriloquist uses Kaiba's cards and cruel strategies to throw Yugi off balance, trying to win not just with cards, but with mind games. However, Yugi manages to turn things around, eventually winning the duel. Now, in the manga, Yugi then inflicts a penalty game. The Ventriloquist is forced to hallucinate that the Kaiba doll transforms into his own image, becoming the puppet master and he the puppet under control. A punishment that's both eerie and fitting. Now, the anime changed this duel, removing the ventriloquist entirely and stripping away most of the psychological edge, but the manga kept pushing boundaries, especially with the next eliminator Yugi faces. Yugi's showdown with Panic, or the player killer of darkness, is one of the most intense duels in the original manga. Panic wasn't just another eliminator, he was designed to be a real threat. In the manga, his appearance is bulkier, his attitude is cold, and his tactics are all about intimidation. There was also a scene in the original anime that was removed from the dub where Mai is being dragged away into the darkness by Panic, which gave him a much more menacing and darker feel. However, the most striking difference comes from the weapon that Panic uses, a rope noose integrated directly into his gauntlet. This wasn't just for show. The noose went around Yugi's neck. If Yugi lost, the noose would tighten, posing a direct physical threat to his life. The stakes in this duel went way beyond cards or life points, making the atmosphere much more tense than anything in the anime. The anime adaptation of course removed the gauntlet and noose, replacing them with vague threats tied to the Shadow Realm and fire. Lots of fire. This change completely erased the immediate danger panic posed. In the manga, when Yugi wins, he punishes panic with a penalty game that forces him to hallucinate being hanged, an experience that's graphic and disturbing. The anime swapped this out for a generic Shadow Realm banishment, stripping away the harsher consequences. These kinds of changes didn't just affect the violence or danger in Yu-Gi-Oh!, they also shaped how mature or suggestive moments were handled, especially in scenes involving other main characters. In the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime and manga, Anzu, or Taya in the dub, found herself in situations that were far more suggestive than anything we saw in the 4Kids dub. One memorable example was a scene where Anzu is taking a shower. There was no real purpose for the moment beyond fan service, with the focus being entirely on her vulnerability. It's a fleeting part of the story, but it signals the manga's willingness to push boundaries that didn't align with the anime's sanitized tone. The other questionable moment from this part involves Joey and Tristan. In one scene, they try to spy on Anzu while she's changing. This classic pervy act isn't just played for humor. It underlines how the manga leaned into awkward, more adult encounters. However, 4Kids Entertainment stepped in to make sure this behavior didn't appear in the anime, which was marketed as a family-friendly show. So this part was completely removed. In the dub version of episode 22, Teo was attacked by a mugger. However, in the Japanese version, she was filmed by a pervert videotaping Teo's skirt. The scenes involving this guy using his video camera as well as the camera's first-person view were cut from the dub version of the anime completely. Now, another great scene that was cut from the dub came in episode 28. While Teo, Tristan and Bakura are investigating Pegasus's castle late at night, they are about to climb one of the towers. Teo complains about having to climb up the rope first because Tristan and Bakura would be able to see up her skirt. In response, the two boys wear blindfolds while climbing. By cutting these moments, the anime abandoned much of the manga's edginess. Anzu's character in particular shifted away from being a focal point for these risque situations. Instead, she became a more straightforward and platonic supporting figure. One of the clearest examples of censorship in Duelist Kingdom is how the anime handled guns. In the Japanese version of the anime, Bandit Keith, after losing to Joey, confronted Pegasus with a gun, showing just how desperate and ruthless he'd become. The weapon was central to the moment and made the threat feel real. But in the dub, this was completely changed. Keith just points his finger at Pegasus, mimicking a gun, which takes away all the intensity and danger from the scene. The same thing happens with Pegasus's goons. In the Japanese version, they pull guns on Kaiba, but in the anime, they just pointed their fingers instead, making the threat almost comical. These changes were more than just edits. They shifted the tone of the entire series. By removing firearms and replacing them with finger gestures, the anime lost the sense of real danger that the manga built up. The stakes felt lower, and the characters' actions didn't carry the same weight. Of course, not every dangerous moment was erased. Some of the most intense scenes in the manga still made it through, even if they were toned down or changed for the anime. Kaiba's boldest and most badass moments in the manga aren't just about his dueling skills. They're about his ability to take dangerous situations into his own hands. One of the most intense examples of this happens when he is confronted by a former Kaiba Corp employee. The man pulls a gun on Kaiba, and what does Kaiba do? He blocks the attack by throwing a Duel Monsters card at the gun, jamming the weapon, then taking it for himself. It's a shocking display of nerve and precision, showing that Kaiba doesn't just rely on strategy in games. He's ready to physically defend himself if it comes to that too. Additionally, this scene also added to the brilliance that is Seto Kaiba and how far he plans things in advance. Do you know what card he used to jam the gun? Well, it was Gyaku Tenno Megami. What makes him use this card specifically brilliant is the fact that the card's name when translated is Goddess of Reversal. Kaiba used this card to reverse his situation. Amazing. Now, the manga takes this whole scene to another level in what I like to call the helicopter incident. So, after jamming the gun with the card, Kaiba doesn't stop there. Once he has the upper hand, he breaks the man's finger, delivering a brutal message, showing us readers that Kaiba doesn't tolerate anyone standing in his way. Now, after discovering that the people flying him to Duelist Kingdom are loyal to Pegasus and reversing the situation in his favor, Kaiba wastes no time making his move. Despite being thousands of feet in the air, he forces them out mid-flight, risking his life just to ensure he can take control of the aircraft. And his dialogue throughout all of this is a testament to how brutal Kaiba is in the manga. For me, these moments define Kaiba's ruthlessness and relentless drive, but the anime toned them down significantly, stripping away much of his menace. Now, Kaiba's brutality didn't stop at the helicopter scene. When Kaiba arrived at Pegasus's castle in the manga, his impatience and sheer determination were on full display. He wasn't there to negotiate or wait for formalities. When Croquet, Pegasus's right-hand man, tried to stall him, offering to set up a meeting the following day, Kaiba didn't hesitate to make his move. Grabbing Croquet by the collar, Kaiba immediately established that he wasn't going to sit idly by while Pegasus toyed with him. But it didn't stop at intimidation. Kaiba pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at Croquet's head, a shocking display of just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. This wasn't a bluff either. Kaiba even referenced Soru Watari, a former Kaiba Corp guard, reminding him of his training and showing Kaiba's familiarity with weapons was no accident. It wasn't just about power, it was about ruthlessness and strategy. Following this, Kaiba took Croquet hostage in a guest room, threatening to snap his neck in a briefcase if Pegasus did not speak to him immediately. Shortly afterwards, Pegasus appeared on the screen and permitted Kaiba to see him if he could beat Yugi in a duel. These moments cemented the dark side of Kaiba's character, showing not only his desperation but his cold, calculated willingness to use violence as a tool. The anime completely removed this scene, softening Kaiba's personality and stripping away this gritty anti-hero edge. Without it, the complexity of his character felt diminished. One of the most surreal and early symbolic moments in the later Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist Kingdom arc comes during Yugi's dream sequence, which was heavily censored in the dub to avoid controversy. In the original version, Yugi dreams that his grandfather's soul, trapped in a card by Pegasus, calls out to him. He runs through an ominous courtyard only to find 3 massive stone crosses, each bearing the cards imprisoning the souls of his grandfather, Mokuba, and Kaiba. The imagery was clear. These crosses symbolize suffering and sacrifice, and their religious undertones added an unsettling depth to the scene. The eerie atmosphere was heightened by a final shot of a church in the background, reinforcing the weight of this spiritual struggle. Unsurprisingly, the dub anime heavily altered this sequence. The crosses were replaced with generic stone pillars, eliminating the crucifixion imagery. Even so, inconsistencies remained. One shot still reveals an arm extending from one of the crosses, a haunting detail the censors missed. To further sanitize the scene, the church in the background was also removed entirely, softening the dream's impact. This censorship robbed the sequence of its dramatic intensity. It dulled the symbolism of characters' internal struggles, ultimately transforming a deeply thematic moment into something far less thought-provoking. Now, in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, the tone wasn't just darker, it was sharper and much more direct, especially in how characters spoke to each other. Swearing and harsh language weren't uncommon, reflecting the teenage audience the manga was aimed at. Characters like Kaiba, Bakura, and even Yugi himself weren't afraid to drop cutting insults or display raw frustration. This edge gave their dialogue a more realistic and emotional weight, adding to the intensity of their conflicts. It wasn't unwarranted, but deliberate, used to emphasize the stakes and underline the characters' personalities. this. For example, Bandit Keith was far more aggressive in the manga. When dismissing his opponents, he would throw in comments laced with profanity or arrogance, painting him as someone who stops at nothing to assert dominance. The dub anime, of course, completely scrubbed his swearing and dialed back his sharpness. Keith still had an ego, but the contempt in his language was watered down, making him less intimidating in comparison. Without this harsher dialogue, the dynamics between characters in the anime became much softer. Interactions that carried raw emotion or intense hostility in the manga felt cleaner or even sanitized in the dubbed anime. And while this softened tone helped the series fit into Western children's programming, it sacrificed the emotional depth that made the manga relationships stand out. That rough, unfiltered edge was integral to the tone, and its absence created a noticeable gap in how dramatic moments unfolded. Sticking with Bandit Keith, his story in the manga is on a whole other level of dark. His backstory paints him as a former United States Duel Monsters champion, someone who rose to the top only to come crashing down after being humiliated by Pegasus. But what makes it grittier is how the manga digs into his downfall. Keith turns to gambling, substances like alcohol and drugs, and even dangerous games like Russian roulette, which, keep a note on that one by the way. This all showed us a man who spiraled deeper into his own failures. And this adds layers to his character, a man consumed by pride and self-destruction. None of this was really explored in the anime, which waters him down to just another cocky bad guy. Now, one of the series' most darkest moments involves Keith. After he loses to Joey in the manga, Keith's desperation peaks. He confronts Pegasus with a knife, demanding his promised winnings, but Pegasus, he has no sympathy. Instead of rewarding Keith, Pegasus uses his Millennium Eye to cast a horrifying penalty game called Hand and Gun. Keith's hand is transformed into a revolver, forcing him to play Russian roulette against himself. Keith ultimately pulls the trigger and dies. This graphic moment highlights the consequences of his choices and Pegasus's cruelty. The anime removed all of this, turning Keith into a throwaway villain, completely erasing one of the manga's boldest and bleakest moments. Pegasus's motives in the manga were much darker and far more personal than what the anime portrayed. While the anime played up his obsession with duel monsters and the Millennium Puzzle, the manga revealed a deeper, more tragic layer to his character. Pegasus wasn't just chasing power, he was trying to use Kaiba Corp's groundbreaking holographic technology to recreate his late wife Cecilia. This wasn't some small side goal, it was the driving force behind everything that he did. Winning the Duelist Kingdom tournament wasn't about the thrill of victory. It was a calculated move to seize control of Kaiba Corp and further his plans. This mix of grief and hunger for power made Pegasus an unsettling figure. He didn't hesitate to manipulate and exploit others to achieve his goals. A great example is how he used a child to humiliate Bandit Keith or trapping Yugi's grandfather's soul in a VHS tape. The manga consistently reinforced his ruthlessness, showing Pegasus as a character willing to cross any line. But when the anime was localized, this side of him was heavily softened. His story became less about tragedy and more about an eccentric villain, dramatically reducing the emotional and sinister weight he brought to the Duelist Kingdom arc. Now, in the manga, Pegasus's fate is sealed in a way that completely shifts the tone of the story. After Yugi defeats him and the Duelist Kingdom tournament ends, Yami Bakura appears. And this isn't one of those dramatic interruptions with vague threats. Bakura murders Pegasus outright, tearing the Millennium Eye directly from his eye socket and even licks the blood off the artifact. This act isn't played up with flashy effects or softened visuals. It's brutal, and it makes the consequences of the Millennium items feel terrifyingly real. Pegasus, who had until then been this all-powerful villain, is reduced to a lifeless body in an instant. In the anime, things play out very differently, of course. Pegasus survives his defeat and is shown recovering with no sign of the violent end he meets in the manga. He even goes on to appear in later arcs and makes it into the movies. This lets his character develop further, but takes away the sense of real consequence that the manga delivers. The decision to keep Pegasus alive in the anime, well, it softened the impact of the story's ending and removed the sense of danger that came with the Millennium items. This difference highlights just how far apart the manga and anime are in terms of tone and stakes. Looking back, it's wild to see just how much changed between the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga and what most of us watched on TV as kids. The manga had moments like Kaiba being left in a coma after a penalty game and Pegasus' brutal death at the hands of Yami Makura. Scenes that 4Kids dub either changed or cut entirely. These differences didn't just change the tone, they completely reshaped the story and its impact. Which of these shocking manga moments stood out to you the most? Drop your favorite in the comments below, and if you want to know who had the strongest deck in Duelist Kingdom, well, check out my next video where I break down every deck from the arc. I'll see you over there, but till then, take care. Peace, peace!